Well, thanks for the patience and the, the flexibility. We'll go ahead and get going. Welcome everyone to this data in action presentation titled "The Time Has Come to Caliperize: Library Data in the Unizin Data Platform." I'm Kyle Unruh. I'm your moderator, so I'll be watching Q&A, but I won't really be going through the exciting bits of the presentation. We have wonderful presenters to do that. If you have any technical questions, just type them in the chat, and I'll be behind the scenes trying to help out as best I can. Our presenters today are Shane Nakarud from University of Minnesota. He's the Director of Affordable Learning and Open Education, joined by Kirsten Clark, also from the University of Minnesota, who's the Director of Library Enterprise Systems. Also joined by Ken Varnum from the University of Michigan, who's the Senior Program Manager and Discovery Strategist. And finally joined with Sarah Bulf, who's from Unizin, who's the data analyst. And I have the joy of working with Sarah every day. So I'm excited to hear the work that these guys have been working on. Caliper data and library data is really exciting, especially for some of our tool integrations with the UDP. So I think it's going to be a really, really great session. So with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters. I'm going to go off camera and on mute, but I'll still be in the background. Take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to, my name is Ken Varnum, as Kyle said, and I'm going to cover two topics to start us off this afternoon. The first, I'm going to go over just very briefly what this Caliper Library Profile thing is and how it fits within the broader Caliper specification and the UDP. And then I'm going to walk through a pilot project that we did at the University of Michigan to work with easy proxy logs, which are an access mechanism common to across academic libraries, and how we got those into the Unizin Data Platform. And I'll look at what we were able to pull back just as a sample of the research. Following that, Shane and Kristen are going to talk about Leganto and how they caliperize that, Leganto being a course, a reading list tool that is included in Canvas. And then at the end, we are going to have hopefully time for questions if all of us can stick to our scripts. So please wish me that. So first, the Caliper Library Profile. So as I'm sure this audience knows well, Caliper is a structured vocabulary, a way to pass metadata, pass data into a data warehouse, such as the Unizin Data Platform, to help quantify and analyze all sorts of interactions that students have with their learning environment, so that researchers and providers can get can look into what's happening under the hood and really understand how interfaces are behaving, how students are accessing data. Are they accessing the readings? Of course, knowing what they do once they've accessed them is a completely separate question. And what was lacking in Caliper up until a couple of years ago was a profile, a set of rules for transferring data out of library systems, which are a bit different from typical academic systems, to describe and characterize them so they could be included in this much larger pot of information for analysis. From the library perspective, it was really important to have the tools and the resources that we use and we provide our campuses, which are, in our view, really essential to the entire learning endeavor, available for research and for understanding. So what happens when somebody accesses a reading list in a course or accesses a material? Do they go? Do they read it? How do they access it? What do they do? So that we can really be part of what we're part of in the physical world is teaching and learning on campuses. So there is, as of about 2 years ago or so, there is a library profile in addition to all the other profiles that you may well be familiar with. So this profile was developed over a couple of years, and Shane and I were both involved in it under a project, the Connecting Libraries and Learning Analytics for Student Success, which was an IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Studies, a government funding agency, under a grant they provided to help specify and develop this profile for others to use. And we did this in partnership with IMS at the time, now One EdTech, as the caretakers of the Caliper specification. And so again, it was coming up with vocabularies and ways to take library interactions, which are not quite the same as what you might find from Canvas, where it's much more about filling out, taking surveys, doing workbooks, doing exercises, clicking on links to access online tutorials, watching videos. How much do people watch videos? Do they watch the whole thing? All that kind of thing. Library use was a little bit a slightly different flavor of things, and those interactions that we librarians were interested in didn't fit neatly into the existing profiles. So we ended up developing 3 fairly broad transaction types within the Caliper framework. Library use, which was really aimed at being able to describe physical use of library spaces. So when perhaps from gate counts in a library, or somebody reserving a meeting room or a study room in a library, something like that. Library resource use, which is probably where the bulk of things would happen, in our view, which is what people actually using a library resource, whether a physical resource, checking out a book, viewing, downloading an article from one of the databases or service providers the libraries contract with, and so forth. And then finally, library participation, which is working with a library employee, a reference, going up to a desk and asking a reference question, going up, attending a training session, virtual or in person, however that might be. These are things that, again, don't fit neatly under existing Caliper specifications profiles, but were really of interest to the library community, and we felt could enrich what was understood about how students learned, where they did their learning, and how they interacted with the resources the library provided. And my notes are hiding my clicker. There we go. So, again, for this audience, I don't want to go into great detail here, but Caliper provides information in little data chunks that are known as triples. They're essentially subject, verb, and object, although they're simplified a little bit, so they don't necessarily read quite like a nice grammatical sentence, but conceptually that's how they're organized. So a very simple example might be a student used library. Very, very generic. A student did something with the library. Doesn't say anything about what the student or what the library thing they used was, but just a very basic statement. A bit more fine-grained, student accessed an article. Or a student attended, the verb isn't really great, but the verb, that's what we settled on, a reference consultation. So the words that get filled in the profile for each of these, the subject, the verb, and the object, are all in controlled vocabularies. There's set lists of things that you can pick from, so that we can compare across libraries ideally, or even over time within a library. We know who is doing what and what they are doing. And each of these things can be decorated with all sorts of additional details, which are just kind of free text. You can put anything in there you like to augment this. So you could do something such as, rather than just the simple student accesses digital resource, you could expand that a bit to say the student with an ID this accesses a digital resource with a DOI of that. So you get much more fine-grained if you choose to. And of course, you can go much more down, much more detailed than that. Timestamps are included, but you can provide context about where they were, either an IP address perhaps, or an on or off campus location, or maybe depending on your what you can get from your campus networking people, a building or other locations such as that. So you can really collect whatever data it is that you want to share and you want to store with the for your own research use and in partnership with other research into learning on campuses. Just to make sure that you all have something to put you to sleep on a Friday afternoon, or whatever afternoon this is, Tuesday afternoon. This is what a Caliper packet actually looks like. It's a structured data exchange format. It's in JSON format. But basically, it starts out, it tells you The first chunk tells you what this is. It's a Caliper Library Profile event as opposed to some other profile. So that's what is making this or describing this. It's a library resource event. It fits under the library profile, and it's using an ID that is just person. So very generic. It's not getting any more specific in this case about who this is. The action is accessed. So this person did something. They accessed an online resource as opposed to sat in a room or anything like that. There's a URL for the thing that they accessed in this case. This happens to be a library resource that they accessed, and we're adding the title of the journal, which we've looked up behind the scenes. So this journal happens to actually be in the Journal of Library Assessment, which I think is actually a fake journal. They were off campus, a timestamp, and they accessed this particular journal in this example in the context of some course, which is Info 567, according to our course catalog of made-up courses. So it provides a lot of context for someone who's doing research, especially when these are added together and amalgamated into larger numbers. So you can find out a tremendous amount more about the Caliper Library Profile if you are curious. There's a QR code and this URL, which I will drop into chat at some point when I'm done talking. And the white paper goes through this in exhausting detail, but it should give you everything you might want to know if you're interested in digging into the whys and the wherefores of the Caliper Library Profile. So with that as a really, really quick introduction to the work that that Minnesota and Michigan have done and are talking about in the rest of this presentation, I want to turn to what we did with this profile using to Caliperize our easy proxy log files. So in case there's not a big library audience here, Easy Proxy is a very common tool that libraries have been using for 20 years to mediate access to licensed content. So when a library licenses some research database or a full text source like the journal Nature or Web of Science or something like that, for far too long, frankly, we have been using IP recognition as the mechanism to control access. So libraries give publishers a list of on-campus IP addresses, and then so if a user of a resource is on the University of Michigan campus, they get access to all the things that they are entitled to as an affiliate of the University of Michigan. If you're off campus, you don't have a University of Michigan IP address, so we run you through a proxy server, which lives on campus, and basically you sign in, say, yep, I'm from the University of Michigan, and then you just get rerouted to the resource through this proxy server giving you an IP address. This is, I'll say, not a great way to mediate authentication for things. The whole industry is moving away from it slowly, but libraries and library vendors are not necessarily the speediest groups to adapt to changing technologies. So this is what we have. It's very widespread, and I anticipate that it will be around for a while to come. So because it's basically a web server under the hood, the Easy Proxy, which does a lot of translating of things, but it's basically a web server. It keeps Apache log files for all the transactions. Now, in the library, we don't keep these Apache log files around forever. They grow like crazy and they're just big, but also they have a lot of data that the libraries consider private for the user from the user perspective. Again, for those of you who are not familiar with libraries, kind of the library profession traditionally has had a very cautious approach and a very careful approach to inadvertently sharing information about its users, what they're looking for or what they're looking at, whether it's physical books or online books. So we wanted to be very careful in the project that we did, and I think Shane will touch and Kristen will touch on this a great deal as well, is we wanted to make sure that we were preserving that privacy of the individual in anything we shared beyond the library into the Unizin, into the data warehouse, the Unizin Data Platform. So keeping that privacy filter in mind, we had two questions in this sort of proof of concept that we did, which is one, can we do this in the first place? And can we get Caliper events out of our Apache log files? And then can we do that while keeping that privacy and having data, being able to pull back data, do anything with it that was interesting or useful to us as researchers? So that's where I want to turn from now. So going back to what the raw data is. Again, if you're not familiar with Apache log files, here is your quick introduction. If you are, this should look very familiar. But basically, a single log has an IP address of the user, it has some kind of user ID, a timestamp, the request, which here is something through the proxy server for us, and then the URL that is being proxied. So the right part of that in the blue, HTTPS link, springer.com, etc., is for a specific item on some Springer, a content provider, a publisher's website, along with some other information about the transaction, whether it was successful, the HTTP code 200, session IDs, lots of other bits and pieces that for us weren't really very relevant. The important pieces here were the user ID and the thing being requested. So we wanted to translate that into a Caliper event, and this is a very, a smaller version of what I showed you earlier, but kind of showing you where we put the pieces that we extracted out of that Apache log file. So here we have at the top under actor, it's a person doing the acting as opposed to some application that might be some mechanized process that was doing something. And rather than providing any kind of person identifier, we abstracted that to just undergraduate or a couple of other levels of academic level, undergraduate, graduate, faculty, staff, and so forth. We say they accessed it. We translate what the thing they accessed. So we pulled that URL out of the logger thing. So we got rid of our local information. It's a library resource they accessed. And sometimes we are able to figure out from the URL what the resource they accessed was, and sometimes we can't. The proxy server has a configuration file that says, for this domain, which has this title, use the proxy server or don't use the proxy server or perform these actions on it. We kind of look up the URL where we can in that file, and if we can pull back, oh, this is the journal Nature, we do that. In this case, we were not able to do so. So in partnership with the folks both at Unizin, who were exceptionally helpful, and with some borrowing some developer time from our system administration group, and working with our central IT organization on campus, we managed to automate and mechanize this lookup and this process. So we have some basic code that does this transformation. It reads the log file lines, gets rid of things that are not useful for us. One of the fun things about proxy servers is that it proxies. So a web page is often a constellation of dozens, hundreds of different elements, images and style sheets and all sorts of things, most of which we don't care about. So we want to not deal with all of those things that were just that were not the web page itself, the item being downloaded. So we filter all that stuff out. We did the lookups and to try to figure out where we could, if the URL being requested was identifiable to something specific, rather than just a publisher platform. And then we connected with our library catalog to abstract the user ID, the specific user, such as my own, Varnum, to a role on campus. In my case, it would be faculty. In a student's case, we picked student, undergraduate or graduate, and so on and so forth. We coordinated with Unizin, and thank you very much, James, to getting our event streams into the UDP, and then Campus IT to build a Tableau dashboard. Now, we had them build the dashboard for a couple of reasons. One was expediency. For us at Michigan, getting access to the real data requires a tremendous amount of training and certifications that you won't do anything bad. And I did not need this for this pilot project, so I didn't. And ITS was quite happy to set up just a quick dashboard that did some fixed queries and just pulled back information that was easier, relatively easy for them to set up, and then gave us some preliminary things to look at. And so I wanted to show a couple of example charts to illustrate the sorts of data we can pull out of this here. So this is overall usage of the proxy server as recorded during February. So a full month. I'll note that winter break started at this dip that you see on February 24th on the right, kind of the right part of the chart. And which is even greater than this kind of a typical pattern you see where Fridays and Saturdays happen to be low and then weekdays are higher. That's pretty typical. But usage during break was mostly lower. So this is all user types with faculty at the top in orange, then graduate students in sort of a yellow, undergraduates in green, staff, and then people that we weren't able to pull back any classification for because the data didn't exist in our library catalog, which we're using for reference. I was curious to know what people accessed at this time. And this was just faculty for the same month. And the number one article downloaded, which was, I can't remember how many, it was well over 100 downloads, was a article whose title I don't understand. I am quite certain I don't understand the content even more, but apparently it was a rock'em sock'em article for the month. Followed by the second one was a chemistry article, and the third is something about statistical analysis. Undergrads were very different for the month. And again, undergraduate research is almost certainly highly driven by whatever's on their course syllabus. Not exclusively, but largely. And so some articles from there, which are very different from the faculty one. This shows the top ones for both. And again, so this is more useful for looking at themes, kind of, who's doing what kind of research at a very high level. And then, so this is merging all use into one, just to get a sense of, are the same people, same kinds of people reading the same kinds of documents? And from this top mathematical, whatever it was, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. Nobody but faculty was reading it during the month. This one was almost all undergraduate, all grad students, with a couple of grad students there at the very tail end. Presumably, this book was co-assigned to an upper level course that a few seniors might have been taking. And again, just kind of looking at the patterns, and this goes on, for many, many, many rows, and I saved you the vast details. So before I turn it over, it's, I don't know that the abstraction that we sort of forced ourselves into is right, whether undergraduates and graduates is the right level, or faculty and staff. It'd be nice to maybe look at more fine-toothed or fine-grained groupings, perhaps by department. But we need to think carefully how we do that so that we're not exposing the 3 people in a department and accidentally saying who is reading what. We want to be very careful about that kind of exposing that kind of information. It's also important to note that this is only off-campus usage. Anybody who is on campus is not captured here because the proxy server is bypassed if you're on campus. And so anyway, so that's just kind of a quick overview, but we're really excited to have some data to work with. Shane and I have talked about doing the same thing with some Minnesota data and seeing what commonalities there might be across our 2 campuses, but that's work still to come. So with that, I am going to stop presenting and turn it over to Shane.
Actually, we'll turn it over to Kirsten.
Apologies, wrong first speaker.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So yeah, so I will be kicking us off to talk about the University of Minnesota and what we're calling our Leganto Caliperization pilot. And then I will turn it over to Shane after that. So let's see. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so for the University of Minnesota, for over a decade, we've actually been using digital course reserves with our students and our faculty. And in 2018, we began using the Ex Libris product Leganto, and there's a screenshot over on the side there from one of our Canvas courses. But one of the reasons that we focused in particular with Leganto is it integrates with our library management system, which is Alma, and with our discovery layer Primo. So it allows us then to incorporate all the different pieces of the library management into one source and thereby provide the most accurate information to the student for the resources that might be a part of their class. So in this case, sorry, I just had a little note pop up there. So in the case of Leganto, we are set so that library staff and instructors can build what are called reading lists with each course. And so with that, with those that are authorized, they again can build these reading lists using library resources or their own resources, and then tie it directly into a Canvas course. So in this case, as the picture I have showing here for this is a poli-sci 8060 course. You will see that towards the bottom of this page, there's a library course materials link, and that takes them directly into the library, into the Leganto reading list for that course. To just give you a sense of what that means in terms of context for the University of Minnesota, these are our fall 2023 statistics. So we had 18,000 course section reading lists. So this is a reading list for 18,000 courses. And we actually do this so that every course has a reading list available through that link in the Canvas page. We do this by creating a base page that has 3 separate links to it, which is a library guide, a link to our student support services, and then a final third link that we vary, and we'll talk a little bit more about here, but we, because it's directly tied to this project. So of those 18,000, about 1,700 have additional print and digital resources on it. So this is adding readings, ebooks, other websites, PDFs, reports, etc., that are being asked for either by the instructor or the library staff is working with the instructor to create, and these tie directly to a instructor's syllabi. And for the fall semester, that was about 30,000 additional items that we added onto various lists. So one of the reasons that we were taking a look at this is that we wanted to, in terms of Leganto, and we worked with Ex Libris on this, is to implement the Caliper Library Profile in Leganto so that we could provide these Caliperized event logs for the Twin Cities and deposit those into the Unizin Data Platform. We really felt that this gave us an opportunity for the libraries to be at the table and talking about learning analytics on campus as well as in Unizin, and kind of just something that Ken referenced. It gave us an opportunity to demonstrate good student privacy and data security practices. So we did end up, in terms of providing this pilot, I should mention that we did have to work with our libraries administration to outline exactly what we were wanting to do here so that we were meeting those data privacy needs, as well as really doing this as a pilot. So we are working on a year pilot, and then we'll take and review that data. But besides us being at the table, we also felt there was additional benefits to using the Leganto data in this way. One, it was to utilize the systems that we already have in place that all of our staff use to manage the resources that the libraries are purchasing and making available for research, teaching, and learning. We already have, as I mentioned, a reading list for every course, so we have a consistent outline to ensure that we are having this available for each course. And then we wanted to really combine that Leganto data with the other Canvas data that we already knew was being collected by the university. And by not having our Leganto data in there, it was creating an incomplete picture for the overall usage associated with the course. So because though we did want to really focus a bit on that student privacy, we did want to get some input from students into this process before we actually started it. And so we did go to our library's advisory board, which is 15 undergrads from different areas and colleges of study, asking them for their feedback on the project that we were doing. And a couple of things that really came out was the students were very interested, as you can probably guess, on understanding how the university was protecting data and student privacy. There was some surprise on how much the university was collecting, and wanting better transparency and understanding. Really then also a desire for an opt-out for data collection. And how could we bring that into play for students that didn't want their data collected? But the thing I think we found the most interesting is that students also saw a huge benefit for this to the faculty member themselves. So we're giving them, the faculty, information on how students are interacting with the materials that they were placing on their syllabi and requiring students to use for the course. So we also wanted then just to highlight what we learned with benefits for the student. We really felt that this, by especially in offering that opt-out mechanism, it gave the students, empowered them to have additional agency in their own learning. They are a part of this process as well, since we are collecting the data for them, and they should be able to choose whether or not they want to have their library data included. And also it was a way, and we look for this as a way to inform and educate students about their own library data and library interactions. For the faculty, we felt that this data also provided them that opportunity to adjust their resources and hopefully increase student success for their own courses by seeing what students are using, and to align the library data with, as I mentioned earlier, the data that's already being collected within Canvas. So before I turn it over to Shane, I just wanted to mention where we finally ended up in our Find a Data profile. So after much discussion over actually several years and working with Ex Libris, starting with 2024, we are collecting data as this pilot for a year. So the Leganto reading lists are assigned by the instructors. They're tied to a course. They're part of the learning management system. And as part of that, then we decided to capture specific data points, and I've listed those here. We wanted to collect when a student opens a reading list, when they open a citation in that list, and when they actually view the reading. And there's several ways that you can view a reading in Leganto. So we wanted to capture when it was an external link. So this might be linking out to a library database. There might be a PDF associated with that citation if they download it, or use the internal Leganto PDF viewer. We wanted to see not just that they were actually viewing those items, but how they were viewing it. And then we have started to deposit that data in the Unizin Data Platform unless the student opts out. And I will turn it over to Shane to talk about that data.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kirsten. Before I do, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of partnerships at work with this project, including Ex Libris itself, the makers of Leganto, but also One EdTech, who manages the Caliper specification, and especially Unizin. Unizin was essential, obviously, for the Unizin Data Platform. We wanted to upload our data there, but also to create this idea of an opt-out mechanism. As Kirsten mentioned, the Student Advisory Board wanted the ability to give to students to opt out of that data collection. With that, I'm going to talk about how we created that. First of all, as Kirsten also was mentioning, this is a Leganto page that doesn't have the Canvas wrapped around it, but picture this in Canvas. Every course reading list that we create gets these 3 links, one of which at the bottom there is student data and the library course materials page. If a student clicks on that particular link, they will get to a page on our library's website that describes data collection at the University of Minnesota in general. It will also then describe this pilot project that we're doing for capturing Leganto data or library course materials data. And then it will give the student an opportunity to opt out of that data collection. So if they click that button there, they can opt out. The student will then get sent to this Google form, not too fancy, and they put in their student ID number, and they say, yeah, opt out, or no, keep my data. And believe it or not, students actually do get to this point and click no, keep my data, which is, I find, kind of interesting. So we started collecting data through Leganto in January of this year, but we presented this form to students with this ability to opt out way back in June of 2023. Since June, about 8,000 people or 8,000 students have clicked on that link to view the information, our effort to be transparent about the data that's being collected. And only 43 students have chosen to opt out. And we consider this to be kind of good news, that if you give students the opportunity to see what's happening, to to give them agency over their data. Sometimes they choose to opt out, but most of the time, in our case, less than 1% of the time that students looked at that page, they chose to opt out. So we find that to be kind of exciting. For us, the pilot next step, we're going to keep on collecting data, inspect the data, do some tweaks, reassess in winter 2025 if we want to keep on collecting data. We would, the main reason we're doing this is so that it can be combined with other Canvas data to, as Kirsten has already said, complete the picture of student use within a course within Canvas. And then also it'd be great at some point to have a dashboard of this data of some kind. And now I'm going to pass it to Sarah.
Thanks. So now I just wanted to talk a little about the library events in the UDP, focusing on how we are ingesting and storing these events in the UDP. So as we mentioned, we are filtering the Leganto events to remove any events associated with students who have chosen to opt out of the pilot project. The process to do this is actually relatively simple. So a TSV file of the students who opted out is uploaded to a Google Cloud storage bucket on a weekly basis. We then use this TSV file to filter out any Leganto events for these students at the UDP Caliper endpoint. And the UDP Caliper endpoint is just a web service that captures, accepts, and validates events before they populate the event store in BigQuery. So because of this process, we basically make sure that any events associated with the opted out students are removed before they populate the event store, and there is no chance of any users of the UDP to see those events. Another important aspect of the event ingestion process in the UDP is the enrichment process. So when we talk about enriching events, we are basically just defining a UDP ID for the event. This is done via the UDP key map, which connects source system IDs, so SIS or LMS IDs, with a single primary UDP identifier. The enrichment process allows events to be associated with context data via common UDP identifiers. Because of this process, when we work to Caliperize events, we often emphasize the importance of including LMS person and course identifiers in the event so that we can use those for enrichment. So for Leganto events, for example, LMS IDs are provided in the federate session field of the event. Another important aspect of the event ingestion and storage process of the UDP is actually creating the expanded table. So the expanded table is a table in BigQuery which stores all Caliper events in the UDP. So as has been mentioned in this presentation, Caliper events are basically stored in JSON format, which can be difficult to work with. So for example, when writing SQL against those events, you basically have to write a bunch of JSON extract functions to get all the fields you're interested in, which is a lot of work. So what Unizin has done is created the expanded table, which basically extracts nested values of Caliper events into a tabular format. So basically, before an event populates the expanded table, we run a bunch of these JSON extract functions on the Caliper event and extract a lot of the relevant fields. So some of the fields we extract are the event ID, the event time, the person ID, course offering ID, and the object name. So the expanded table allows users to easily interact with Caliper event as the relevant fields in the event are extracted and in a table format. And this makes working with the data and any analysis on the data much easier. So that's just kind of an introduction of how the events are stored in the UDP. And now I think we're have a couple minutes for some questions, or 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm back. Thank you, presenters, for this really exciting content. I see 2, maybe 3 questions in the chat. First from Heather from Florida. Heather's question is, so what's the process for those 43 students who do opt out?
Well, they fill out that form, and then we, on a weekly basis, send the complete list of all the students that have opted out. And then, as Sarah was mentioning, that data that is generated by the students never actually gets into the UDP, or if it does get into the UDP, it's removed on that weekly basis as soon as they know who the students are that have opted out. So did that answer your question?
Yep. Okay, great. We have a question from Dave Long. And we may run a few minutes over if that's okay, presenters. There's
Sure.
more questions. So for the reading list in Leganto, can you tell me again how those are set up, provisioned, and created? Is there something each instructor does for the course? Are they automatically set up in some way ahead of time?
Yeah, so we actually run several scripts, as well as based on our course, our semester course load. But basically, we do that on the side of enterprise systems within ALMA, create those reading lists at specific times before the beginning of the semester, so that they're available for the faculty member when those courses become available on Canvas. So we try to time it so as soon as Canvas opens up, for instance, for summer 2024, the reading lists have already been created. If there's reading lists from prior semesters, we do also roll over. There's a functionality within Alma and Leganto that allows the rollover of courses, and we have specific matching points. But that's pretty much all set up before the instructor even starts looking at their course. And so the idea behind that then is that there's really no additional steps for the instructor. It's already there waiting for them. And then either they can add to it, or they can contact the libraries, and Shane staff will work with them to actually populate those lists. For the most part, there's been a couple kinks over the years. Courses that have multiple sections sometimes have some issues, but for the most part, we've refined that. And I'm happy to follow up with anybody that wants more additional information on what we're actually doing with those steps.
There's just one last question, if we can hang out for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, from Chris Leyland at Wisconsin. I'd be curious to hear more the team's thoughts on implementing Caliper themselves versus trying to influence vendors to implement or improve implementations. Any lessons learned there? We
did need Ex Libris to implement Caliper for Leganto, and there was a lot of back and forth. We would have been up and running a lot quicker, but there was like a month-long development cycle that they had to go through. So like if there was a problem, we would have to go back to them and say, okay, now you need to fix this. And so that took, I don't know, Kirsten, what did that take? Half a year to a year before we got Caliper actually working in Ex Libris and Leganto. If you're a Leganto user, Caliper is there for you, and you can just click a button and turn it on. You have to send it somewhere, and in our case, we send it to the UDP, of course. But so yeah, working with the vendor, it was a lot of back and forth. But Ex Libris, I found to be really willing to do this work. It just took a while.
Great. Thank you for hanging out a few extra minutes and answering those questions. And thank you for the engagement from all the audience. Looking forward to the rest of the Unizin Summit sessions. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.